Year 1914. A small island where there is neither a city nor crowds of people, only a lighthouse and a mystery hidden in the depths of the sea. The film opens, showing a ship traveling toward its destination through the South Atlantic Ocean. On that ship was a weather officer named David. They were heading to an island concealed in the deepest part of the Atlantic Ocean. The government had sent David there to observe the island's changing weather. David was to stay there for about a year to collect data, understand the strange weather shifts, and then return. The captain was taking David to that island on his ship, along with a year's supply of food and all necessary equipment. After a long journey, they finally reached the island. They used a boat to reach the island and brought their necessary supplies with them. On the island was a lighthouse and a small house where David would stay, because a weather officer had lived here before, but his duty time was now over. Starting today, David was the island's new weather officer, and the old officer, Robert, was returning home aboard Captain Axel's ship. But when they entered the house, they were shocked. There was no sign of any human. Inside, furniture was scattered everywhere, everything upside down. Maybe someone was hiding in the lighthouse. Without wasting time, the captain and David moved toward the lighthouse and saw a strange sight. The entire lighthouse was surrounded by sharp-pointed wooden stakes, as if someone had purposely sealed it to keep anyone out. The captain and David knocked on the lighthouse gate several times, but got no response. Finally, they pushed the gate hard and entered. At the very top of the lighthouse, they found a man named Gruner lying there. When they asked Gruner about the previous weather officer, he responded casually, "He's dead, some terrible illness." When the captain asked about a dead body, his answer grew even stranger. Perhaps someone killed him. Hearing Gruner's words, both David and the captain were stunned. They thought Gruner's mental state might be unstable, but until they found the previous officer's whereabouts, they could do nothing. The captain told David that if he still wanted, he could return with them, but David knew that if he could provide the government an accurate weather report from this island, he could earn a substantial sum, and he needed the money, so he decided to stay. The captain gave him a gun for protection. Perhaps this place was not as safe as it appeared. After the captain left, David settled into the house, making it livable. In one drawer, he found a diary of the previous officer, who had arrived on the island in 1913. The diary contained many notes about the island, but much was unclear. Some entries were incomplete. David read every line carefully. The diary also had strange sketches of animals. He couldn't understand why he had drawn such pictures. Perhaps he was lonely and passed time this way. On one page, there was a photo of the officer's wife, too. Reading the diary, David grew tired and eventually drifted off to sleep. The next morning, David began his work, but upon nearing the sea, he stopped in his tracks. Among the rocks, stones had been arranged in odd ways, with some seashells placed between them in strange patterns. He thought perhaps Gruner had done it, and then resumed his work, collecting weather data. During work, looking through binoculars at the lighthouse, he saw another person with Gruner, but he dismissed it as a trick of the light. That night, while busy with his work, someone knocked on the door. He thought it was Gruner, called out, but got no answer. Taking a lamp, he advanced, and suddenly heard strange sounds echoing in his ears. He looked and saw from under the gate a bizarre creature's hand trying to reach inside. That hand was not human. David's heart filled with terror. He immediately ran to the basement and hid. In moments, that mysterious creature had entered the house and was stealthily searching for him. Through a small crack in the basement, its horrifying eyes stared at him. David picked up a knife, and when those eyes came close to the crack, he stabbed hard with full force. The creature screamed and fled, but it could return any time. David secured the basement door tightly, tied it with rope, and spent the entire night awake. In the next morning, David stepped out and saw footprints in the sand. They were not human at all. They led straight into the sea and ended. Now David understood why Gruner had placed those pointed stakes around the lighthouse, perhaps to keep that strange creature out. And now David knew this house was far from safe. The creature might return tonight. In fear, David ran to the lighthouse, shouting at Gruner to open the gate. "Let me in!" But Gruner refused, telling him he should have returned on the ship. David returned, dejected, but knew he had to secure his home. He boarded up every window, surrounded the place with sharp wood, and placed old papers and books outside the gate, dousing them in oil to scare off the creature with fire. But there was one thing David didn't know, and he would soon discover it tonight. He found an old box inside the house containing a gun and many bullets. This gave him some courage, though his fear remained alive. As the sun set, darkness enveloped everything. David, gun in hand, sat quietly in a corner, heart racing. Then a strange voice reached him. When he approached the window, the ground seemed to shift beneath his feet. But instead, out of the water rose many of those bizarre creatures, all heading toward his house. They began trying to break through the gate. David immediately started shooting bullets. Some creatures fell, but others became even more aggressive. They tried to enter the house. As their numbers grew, David set fire to the papers papers and books outside the gate. Seeing the fire, the creatures, terrified, retreated back into the sea. But the fire had spread to David's house. It was built entirely of wood, and the flames spread like electricity. David wrapped himself in a sheet, broke through the gate, and escaped. He hid behind a large rock near the lighthouse, his right hand badly burned. Thankfully, rain began at that moment, gradually dousing the flames. But by morning, David's house was gone, almost entirely reduced to ashes. David realized he had to seek refuge in the lighthouse if he wanted to survive. He grabbed his rifle and hid among the rocks near the lighthouse. When Gruner came out to fetch water, David followed him, intending to hold him at gunpoint and gain entrance. But suddenly, a strange creature near Gruner attacked him. It was the creature's protector. Gruner stopped David and revealed, "This is my pet." David didn't shoot, but set a condition. To stay alive, he must be allowed into the lighthouse and given enough gunpowder and food to last a year. Gruner paused, then quietly agreed. By evening, both returned to the lighthouse with the remaining food. The next morning, the creature quietly licked David's hand while he slept, and his hand healed significantly. David was shocked. It was hard to believe. At the top of the lighthouse, he watched Gruner count the bullets they had, while the creature assisted in its own way. This meant it was not violent. David now wanted to learn more about it from Gruner, and then bring this discovery to the world. It was nothing less than a miracle. A strange female creature emerged from the ocean's deep darkness. If the truth about her came out, David and Gruner would become world famous. But Gruner didn't want that. He didn't want to leave the island. He had no one. He believed no one in society lived freely without being someone's servant. For him, this island was perfect. Here, he could feel like a king, master of his destiny. That's why he had written in many parts of the island, "Gruner is king." But how had this strange female creature become his pet? Once, Gruner had saved her life. She got caught in his fishing net when she was young. Since that day, she stayed with him and obeyed his every command. But Gruner was a violent man. He never treated her humanely. He maintained a physical relationship with her. Once she attacked him, and as punishment, Gruner disciplined her in such a way that she began to regard herself as his servant. Perhaps that's why every night she went into the sea to bring back creatures. But by day, they could not attack. David, however, no longer wanted to stay. He wanted to signal any passing ship and leave, but Gruner insisted no ship ever came here. David didn't believe him. He felt suffocated here and wanted to leave as soon as possible. Evening fell. Gruner told him to get ready with the gun, because the creatures could attack any time. They prepared to switch the lighthouse light on, and soon a large number of creatures emerged from the sea, heading toward the lighthouse. Gruner fired continuously. David was completely terrified and retreated inside. Despite Gruner's urging, David remained silent in a corner and soon fainted. Gruner fought the creatures alone. The next morning, Gruner angrily woke him and said, "If you want to stay in the lighthouse, you must obey me. Bring water daily, manage the lighthouse chores, and stand guard at night with me." Whether David liked it or not, these were his obligations to survive. David agreed. But one practice he could never accept: the physical torture Gruner inflicted on the female creature. But a man living alone on a deserted island tends to lose his mind. David thought Gruner's mental state might be further deteriorating. Still, David had to obey. Night came again, and they readied for guard duty. Once more, the creatures emerged. David was no longer afraid. He fired, but Gruner did nothing. He locked the gate and stayed inside, wanting David to learn how to fight them himself, or he would die trying. David cried, calling for help, but Gruner didn't come. They battled through the night, and morning arrived. Gruner found David seated in front of the lighthouse gate, covered in blood. Now he had learned how to fight the creatures. His fear was gone. Time passed. Nights filled with fighting. Days managing Gruner's lighthouse duties. This island had become a prison. David constantly thought, "When will I leave and be free?" Gradually, David formed a strange friendship with the female creature. He began to feel compassion for her. He realized how hard loneliness is. Perhaps she experienced the same. He gave the creature a name, Anarius. Then one day they noticed the creature's attacks were reducing. David thought maybe during winter they went elsewhere like whales, or perhaps they understood fighting both humans would get them nowhere. But Gruner bluntly said no, they would attack again. They were reproducing, their numbers rising. Days passed. One night after dinner, David and Gruner began playing chess to pass time. But Gruner made a big mistake. They became so absorbed in the game that they forgot to switch the lighthouse light on. Under cover of darkness, the creatures attacked. David saw they had bred so many creatures that even two together couldn't fight them off. Their gun bullets were nearly gone. Somehow they reached the top of the lighthouse, but Gruner's leg was severely wounded. Creatures tried to break in. David and Gruner saw no escape. They gave up hope until dawn came. As the sun emerged, the creatures left the lighthouse and returned to sea. Anarius tended Gruner's wounds. Now David realized they could not win this fight. They were nearly out of bullets and had insufficient food to continue. The next day, by luck, while walking outside, David spotted a ship in the distance. distance. He quickly grabbed a flare gun and headed to signal it, but Gruner stopped him, not wanting David to leave. At that moment, Anarius attacked Gruner to protect David. Gruner didn't want anyone to leave the island. It was his world, where he reigned as king, and she his servant. But after so long alone, he had someone to speak with. The ship disappeared from David's sight, gone into the sea. He had nothing to do now. More days passed. Gruner still treated them poorly, but especially brutal to Anarius. David disliked this deeply. One day, he gifted Anarius a small toy boat he made from whale bones, hoping to cheer her. When Anarius saw it, she led David to a corner of the island where a real boat was hidden. David asked Gruner about it. Gruner admitted that months ago, an arms smuggling ship carrying munitions had been caught in a storm and wrecked near the island. Some people reached the island alive via boat, but by morning none survived. They were prey to the creatures. Hearing this, David came up with a plan. They had diving suit-like gear. Maybe someone could dive and salvage bullets or dynamite from the wreck to aid in fighting. But Gruner immediately refused. He did not want to approach the sea. David, risking his life, was ready to attempt it. More days passed. A deep connection formed between David and Anarius. David began to care for her. Gruner observed this silently, and for the first time thought he might help, but his actual motive was different. He wanted David to retrieve the underwater dynamite boxes, then abandon him so the creatures would kill him, so Gruner would have the dynamite and Anarius as his servant again. Both went to the site. David donned a diving suit and dove. The ship was completely wrecked, but fortune smiled. They found some dynamite boxes. Suddenly, the creatures appeared. David panicked and fell. The heavy iron suit immobilized him. He couldn't even signal Gruner. Gruner feared David had been killed by the creatures. But underwater, David found only 2 small creature babies. He created underwater pressure, abandoned his diving suit there, and swam back to the surface. They found several old boxes containing dynamite. They set up 2 layers of dynamite around the lighthouse, so that when the next attack came, they could eliminate the monsters in one go. Months passed, and snow began to fall. But once again, the creatures vanished. Their attacks ceased. Now their main tasks were operating the lighthouse and keeping guard. Gruner's patience had worn thin. Perhaps Anarius had revealed their dynamite plan to the creatures, so the attacks stopped. Gruner flew into a rage and began beating Anarius, but David stopped him. Eventually, the 3 devised a new plan. Leave the main gate of the lighthouse open so when the creatures arrived, they'd trigger the dynamite. Soon the creatures emerged and marched through the main gate toward the lighthouse. They attacked David. As they approached the lighthouse, Gruner pressed the dynamite lever, but the blast didn't go off. The connection was broken by David forgetting to reconnect it. David hurried upstairs and rewired it. Meanwhile, the creatures were trying to climb the lighthouse, and only Gruner was trying to hold them off. The moment the connection was restored, David triggered the first, but still many remained ready to attack, so Gruner detonated the second layer. Both were knocked unconscious by the terrible explosion. The next morning, when they regained consciousness, Anarius was gone. Dead creatures were strewn around. Gruner was executing the surviving ones when David noticed a necklace hanging around one creature's neck. At that moment, he realized his greatest mistake. The creatures they had viewed as violent were civilized like humans. They just couldn't speak. Perhaps their attack on the lighthouse was for a reason, but for Gruner, such things were meaningless. He was king of the island, and everyone had to obey his commands. After that day, the creatures never attacked again. But every day, David heard a crying voice coming from the shore. David still didn't understand how much loss they'd caused, how many families shattered, how many children lost their loved ones, all because of a misunderstanding. The next day, David saw some little creature children in the sea, the ones who'd lost their families. David made a circle of stones on the shore and placed the little toy boat he had made in the center, hoping Anarius would return. But no matter how long he waited, Anarius never came back. One morning, David found Gruner unconscious, surrounded by some old objects. Among them was an old photograph. When David saw it, he was shocked. It was the same woman whose photo he saw in Gruner's diary on the first day. She was not someone else. She was Gruner's wife. She had been the weather officer who had come to the island about a year ago. Her real name was Robert, but he changed his name because he never again wanted to leave this island. Seeing this, David gave up hope that he would ever leave the island. The next evening, when David went to the seashore, he saw that the little boat they had placed in the circle was gone, but in its place, he saw a baby creature holding that boat in its hands. David placed his torch in the center of the circle to show he meant no harm. He wanted friendship, not fight. Moments later, Anarius emerged from the waves, followed by the whole group of creatures. But this time, none attacked David. They wanted peace. Their intent had always been to find a safe place for their young, like all animals do. They didn't like humans suddenly entering their home. That's why they attacked every night. But now, who would explain this to Gruner? He still regarded himself king. Gruner came out of the lighthouse with his gun, as David tried to explain,
"These creatures don't want to fight, they want peace."
But Gruner didn't listen. He yelled at Anarius to go inside. But strangely, for the first time, she didn't obey. Now, she was no longer his servant. She was a mother, protecting her children. children. Gruner felt weakened inside. No one obeyed him now. In anger, he advanced toward the lighthouse. David thought Gruner would finally understand that every living being wants freedom, and no one wants to serve someone. But Gruner was not a reasonable man. As he reached the lighthouse, he fired his flare gun. It flew straight into a baby creature, killing it instantly. All the creatures fled in terror, and Anarius lost all trust in David. Enraged, David ran toward the lighthouse and confronted Gruner. He fought Gruner, shouting, "Why did you do this? These beings only wanted peace." But Gruner had become so violent, he decided to kill David, raising his axe. As he was about to strike, David called him by his real name, Robert. This stopped Gruner dead in his tracks. The man Robert had ceased to exist. His mental state had broken after coming to the island. Loneliness, the death of his wife, deep depression. He was never a killer. He was a good man. The creatures never wanted to fight. They only sought peace. Robert had killed them to feel powerful. Now he realized his mistake and surrendered himself to the creatures, who killed him shortly afterward. David locked himself in the lighthouse as time passed. A year later, government officers arrived on the island with a new weather officer. David was taken away. The new officer began monitoring weather, but he mistook David for Gruner, and David did not correct him. He quietly went to the balcony and stood there without saying a word, because now he, just like Gruner, didn't want to leave this island.
By then, Anarius was living happily with her family, free from fear of someone like Gruner. Now she could live her life freely on the island and in the sea.
If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video. And for more thrilling movie explanations, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload. Also, tell me in the comments what you thought of the movie and which film you'd like to see explained next. Your one like and comment really motivates me to bring you more amazing content. See you in the next awesome story. Until then, take care and stay curious.